Throughout the Second World War, there were many influential and experienced military generals who commanded their troops with skill. Some of them became infamous, such as the Desert Fox Erwin Rommel, who would gain a reputation even amongst his enemies for his determination and wily command of the battlefield. Some generals would, though, if captured by their enemies, pay the ultimate price. For example, those German generals and commanders who fell into the hands of Soviet forces were dragged out to public trials, and they were then sentenced to death. Many of these men were executed on a huge set of gallows, and they would be strung up in front of a huge crowd who were incredibly angry about their crimes that the men had committed on the Eastern Front following the launching of Operation Barbarossa. Inside of Italy, the political and military situation became very complex and also brutal following the fall of Mussolini, as partisans and fascists became embroiled in a civil war which they ruthlessly fought against each other. In fact, the partisans would even in their most infamous moment string up the executed body of the former fascist dictator Mussolini, and his remains were subjected to a shocking amount of abuse at the hands of an angry crowd. But years before this, there was one execution of an Italian general at the hands of the German forces, which was also ruthless, and he encouraged his men, who should have been loyal to the Germans, to rise up and fight against them. But for this, Major General Guiseppe Amico paid the ultimate price. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Guiseppe Amico was born in Capua on the 1st of November 1890, and he embarked in a long career in the armed forces and the Italian military, which began when he was a teenager. In 1909 he entered the Military Academy of Artillery and Engineers based in Turin, and he would study for a few years. He graduated in 1911 with the rank of second lieutenant and was then assigned to the field artillery to work. In 1913 he was promoted to the rank of lieutenant and was assigned to command groups of soldiers inside the 13th Field Artillery Regiment. As the Italians entered the First World War, Guiseppe Amico was commanding artillery forces, and his men were important on the battlefield, shelling their enemies on the Western Front. In September 1915 he was promoted to the rank of captain and transferred, but in 1916 he was then given command of a cavalry division, which was slightly different for him. He achieved a number of military medals for his service in the Italian army, including the Silver Medal of Military Valour, and towards the end of the First World War he was promoted to the rank of major. But between 1920 and 1921, Guiseppe Amico, in the intervening war years, went back to war school and he became a teacher and ran classes on military leadership and had a personal role in training the next breed of military soldiers. He remained in the army at the time and was promoted yet again to colonel, and he was placed in charge of establishing the borders of Albania. After completing this, he returned to command artillery regiments, but let's remember that at the time he was representing the armed forces of Italy, who were very loyal to Benito Mussolini, the fascist dictator who had seized power years before, and who was seen in a sense as a warmonger. Mussolini would wage war in different nations and on different continents, and he would also deploy his forces in different conflicts, but on the whole the Italian army was at the time stretched, and was later during the Second World War considered rather ineffective. Mussolini's rise to power was what helped to inspire Adolf Hitler to try and take control and power inside of Germany, and he of course then established his Third Reich and state, which would ally itself closely to Mussolini under the Axis alliance. Guiseppe Amico saw action in many of these military escapades launched by Mussolini, and he even fought in the Spanish Civil War, yet again commanding an artillery regiment, and he was later given command of the Corps of Volunteer Troops. He saw fighting in a number of different battles and received further medals. For his merit and skill on the battlefield during the Spanish Civil War, in 1939 he was appointed to the rank of Brigadier General, becoming a general at last, and he was appointed Chief of Staff of the 4th Army and then the 8th Army. The Italians would enter the Second World War, with Mussolini allying himself with Hitler on the 10th of June 1940 in the Pact of Steel, and Italy declared war on France and Great Britain. The Italian military had been unprepared for war when Hitler attacked Poland, and Mussolini sought to reap further territory for himself alongside Hitler, who he believed would help him capture it. The Italians had around 30 divisions on the Alpine frontier, and they delayed their attack on southeastern France until the 20th of June 1940, and their attack achieved little against local defences. Guiseppe Amico was sent over to North Africa in December 1940, and his forces struggled, and his division was actually annihilated during Operation Compass and further battles, but Amico managed himself to evade capture and avoid becoming an Allied prisoner of war by marching on foot around 120 kilometres, crossing the desert until he got to Tobruk with a small group of other generals and fascist colonels. He was then given further command of the 32nd Infantry Division Marsh, whose headquarters were in Croatia, and he became in January 1942 a Major General. But General Amico began to become in opposition to the fascist policies, and especially in the policies which the Nazis were imposing upon people inside of the lands where he was working. He began to actively oppose and try to prevent the deportations of Jewish people living in the regions which were occupied by soldiers and men, and he refused to hand over Jewish people to the brutal Ustascha, a collaborationist group said to have been more brutal than the SS. He also refused to give them to the Germans, who either would execute them using the Einsatzgruppe death squads, or who would send them to extermination camps or concentration camps. With this, General Amico attracted a huge amount of criticism and negativity, especially from German commanders, and his relationships with also those in charge of the independent state of Croatia went downhill and deteriorated. He became a sworn enemy of the Nazis and the Ustascha, and his men would later participate in the Battle of Neretva against Yugoslav partisans who were causing chaos with their resistance to the Axis forces. The partisans were considered one of the most dangerous resistance groups of the Second World War, and they would be a thorn in the side of the Germans and Italian forces. Amico was continuing to cause problems for the Nazis and the Italian military high command, as he continued to oppose repressive policies, and he did not follow orders to arrest and imprison those who were being persecuted by the Nazis. He would hold Dubrovnik against the 7th SS Volunteer Mountain Division, Prince Eugen, following the armistice of Cassaville, which marked an end to the hostilities between Italy and the Allies during World War II. Following the overthrow of Benito Mussolini, Amico's forces refused to give over Dubrovnik, a Croatian city, but he then entered a meeting with the Nazis. He was betrayed during this parley and was captured by the SS, but was released on the conditions that he would tell his men to surrender. However, when he addressed his men, he encouraged them to fight against the Germans and the SS, and he ordered many of his men to join the Yugoslav partisans and help them liberate their lands from the Nazis. But General Amico for this was arrested, and he was captured by the SS. He was marched out near to a wall, and the Nazis wanted to deal with him once and for all. They had arranged a firing squad for him, and he was not even given a military court-martial, but was seen as a man who had betrayed the Axis alliance many times. He faced his firing squad, who was stood opposite him, and the firing squad was considered a military-style execution with honour for a man who was a general after all. The firing squad took aim with their rifles, and they then shot directly into the heart of Amico, who was instantly killed. After his death, the general was later awarded the Gold Medal of Military Valour, and his body was later returned to Italy in the 1960s, and he was given a dignified burial. During the Second World War, there were few generals who were as brave as Guiseppe Amico. He encouraged his forces to disobey the Nazis and the Germans and to even fight against them, and he would also refuse to give over those who were being persecuted by the Nazis for their slaughter. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.